So we've created a couple avenues for people to ask us questions on the podcast. So if you want to ask us questions on the podcast, go to the website, fill out the form, or leave us a voice message, and we'll play it on the podcast. So like a nice thing about a voice message, we can play on the podcast.
Yeah, so go to arguingagile.com where you'll find that form.
That's right, arguingagile.com. This podcast, we are going to talk about a subject that Clint suggested, going from a team who estimates to being a team that doesn't have to estimate at all. So Clint, this is your podcast if you're listening. And his question was on the topic of story points and throughput, aka cycle time, lead time. But in Agile Podcast 50, we did the whole hour-long podcast just on estimation, why you estimate, different types of estimation. So I'm going to only try to rehash as much of that as I absolutely have to on this podcast. But we did a whole hour-long podcast, a deep dive in the different ways of estimation. Yep. So we're not going to touch that. But we are going to handle, Clint, we're going to handle the spirit of your topic rather than the letter of your topic.
All right, so let's start. What did Clint say?
So he says, have you guys covered story points versus cycle time as a topic yet? I think a lot of people could benefit from that. So Clint is using story points currently. And I said cycle time, but what I believe, Clint, what I believe you mean is throughput, like regardless of the actual metric of cycle time and or lead time. I don't think in Agile Podcast 50, I don't think we talked about cycle time, lead time in terms of the wait time involved,
right?
And the time of delay being calculated and stuff like that. That's a little bit deeper than I think we got into in episode 50.
Yeah, I suspect that's true.
But again, the spirit of his question is the team kind of struggles with estimates. They're doing story points. They're doing the best they can. Now, how do we evolve the team to get to a point where they don't even bother with estimates anymore?
Yeah, that's a fantastic topic because I feel like people don't really address that sort of thing. They get into the mechanics of estimation and things like that, but nobody talks about bringing a team through a level of maturity where they don't have to estimate, right? Starting from a spot where they do. If you are on a team that is estimating and you need help with that, check out Arguing Agile podcast number 50. It's all about estimation. Maybe we'll put a link below.
I'll even throw the card up on the screen for this one. This is going to be a little bit different than our normal. Like, this is not going to be like debate style podcast where we're trying to do pros and cons. We're just trying to give you different strategies in this podcast to help you. Maybe you can apply these strategies. Maybe you can apply one. Maybe you can apply multiple. Maybe you can apply all of them. But when you apply them and you see them being successful, you are further along the path toward moving from a team that estimates to a team that doesn't have to, right?
That's right.
Kind of struggles with estimates, they're doing story points, they're doing the best they can. Now, how do we evolve the team to get to a point where they don't even bother with estimates anymore?
If you think about it from a lean standpoint, anything you're doing that's not adding value is a waste. Mm-hmm. An estimation for the sake of estimation is a waste. Now, I get why people do it. It's a plethora of reasons. It's being asked of them. They hide under the guise of wanting predictability, etc. So if you've got a team that is doing estimation, talk about this with your team and figure out, why are they estimating? What are they trying to solve?
Yeah. Anybody that picks up this podcast, like, their team probably is estimating, and they probably are like, whoa, what do you mean without estimating? Like, why are they estimating in the first place? Let's start there. Product manager bringing my product management needs to this discussion, I need to be able to forecast. So that would be the first thing that my brain goes to is I need a forecast.
Yeah, and that forecasting ask is, not only from a product standpoint, I've seen it from the PMO standpoint too, because they're used to handing down mandates in the form of prescribed Gantt charts and thou shall do this by this date type of thing. So when the team start estimating at the sprint level, people want to know, does all this stuff fit in with my milestones that are on my Gantt chart that I fabricated out of thin air? Yeah. So teams estimate for a plethora of different reasons, right? That's true. Predictability is one. We're not saying that you can't get predictability if you're not using story points, though. That is just a way to do that.
Well, I mean, you could estimate in hours.
You could. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just as good as any other or as bad as any other way of doing it. What it comes down to is people looking for accuracy or precision, in estimates, because the word itself tells you what it is. It's an estimate, which is really just a best effort guess as to when the team might get something done by. Mm-hmm. So by definition, it is not a guarantee. But I don't want to go down that path too much.
Another reason that teams estimate is the act of going through the estimation where, we say, hey, we need to add a form to the website, and Brian and Owen both hold up cards at the same time, and Brian's holding a 3 and Owen's holding a 13. The actual act of estimating helps facilitate the conversation where we talk through and agree on what is in and what is out of the work item. So whereas otherwise, if one developer just picked it up and said, well, I got this, don't worry, guys, like I'll pick up the next order off the line, I'll pick up the next ticket for a cheeseburger or whatever. Like if we did that, like I might cook you a really elaborate cheeseburger when all you want is like completely plain, no ketchup, no nothing.
Yeah.
Not even any cheeseburger. Yeah, I don't know.
Cheeseless cheeseburger.
That's right.
No, this is where you end up with this is where you end up with team members saying, I'm working on this, right? Pretty much every day at your daily stand-ups. So yeah, that's very true that the act itself lets you reduce the cone of uncertainty to a certain degree, at least have a dialogue around it. So there is that benefit, right, to that. But there are alternatives too, right, to that. So for example, what would happen if your stories were so small that the team could understand what needed to be done? There's only one thing that exists in the story as the description for it. There's only one thing that defines what the definition is for finishing it, which is the AC, the acceptance criteria, and that's it. Just one, right? Then if every story was like that, the stories are so small that if you estimate them, they're likely not going to diverge too much. It'll go from 1 to 3, maybe a 5. Occasionally, right? And then you keep talking about that and reduce it down even further, so it comes down to a 3. Yeah. So fast forward, right? So most of your stories are 1 to 3 point stories. Is there any point, pun intended, in estimating all of those stories at that point? If you get to that level of breaking down stories,
I see. So if the whole team agrees, like if you have a team agreement that says, if the story is considered a 1, 2, or 3 in story point size, we just call it 3 and move along with our lives.
Pick a number, 1 or 3. Nobody dies on this. Because the difference between them is so small, right?
Yeah. I can see that that's a great first step. I guess we're talking about like walking the walk now. So the first one that you recognize is keep refining a work item until you get into the range of a 1, 2, or 3. The other thing that I have told my teams before is when you pick up a work item, you need to look at it from the perspective that it can be done through whatever your definition of done, deployed to production, completely done in 2 days. If you can't have that item done in 2 days, we need to first of all clearly identify this is not possible in 2 days, and then we'll talk about what pieces can be delivered in 2 days, and we'll break the story up, and we'll break it in pieces, and then we'll decide what priorities and stuff like that. So that's another technique I've used to help the team understand how to break things down. I guess we're talking about vertical slicing now, I guess.
We absolutely are, and yeah, that technique is good as well, right? Because if you're deploying something into production or whatever your DoD is in 2 days, that's well within a sprint, so you can get things delivered as value in a production environment. So that's good. I've seen this is credited to Mike Miller, who's watching, obviously. Good on you, Mike. Yeah, so he came up with this rule of thumb that's,
he gets the hose.
1 by 1 by 1 equals 1. So what he means is 1 action, 1 actor, 1 result,
that's right.
And that's 1 story. Anything more than the ones in there, break it down more, right? Through your refinement, try and get to that point with your team where everything is so small that the team's not spending any time arguing over whether it's a 1 or a 2 or a 3.
1 action, 1 actor, 1 result.
Yeah.
1 actor, 1 action, 1 result.
1 actor, 1 action, 1 result. It's hard to say that off. Reel it off the tongue.
Yeah, sure.
But it kind of made sense. He uses the example of accepting payment by credit card, for example, right? That some teams start that off as a story, and then have another story that says accept payment by ACH or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But his point is, why do that when you can break it down and say accept payment by Visa, right? The first story is where all the learning happens, so maybe that's a 2 or a 3. And then the next story, accept payment by MasterCard. What really changed from that story to the previous one? Just the algorithm, just the checksum changed, right? Yeah. So that makes sense to me, because at the end of the sprint, let's say you didn't get all of the stories done to accept payment by different credit cards, but you got some done.
Yeah.
You can still go to production and say we accept Visa, MasterCard, tackle Discover or whatever else you've got left in the next sprint. So you're delivering value at least. So that made a lot of sense to me, thinking about it that way as well.
Yeah.
I think all of these examples come down to this only, right? Break your stories down so that you can deliver slices of value. But don't do it horizontally, please.
You said something. Oh, no, look at me. I got a jacket on now. That's so
How'd
weird.
that happen?
You said something in your example about like the learning is kind of front-loaded with the first story. I want to challenge that because something I've been doing with my teams for a while now is I spin the learning out into its own story. And I will tag the story where the learning is done appropriately to let the business know that time should go on the budget wherever training and stuff comes from, like that particular budget, because I'll mark things as capabilities. Basically, the team has learned to do something that they didn't know how to do before. Maybe it doesn't work for credit card processing.
Yeah.
Maybe it's better for deploy our software via Kubernetes or whatever when nobody on the team has any exposure to Kubernetes. So they have to go out and learn Kubernetes. So that's like the story at that point is like demonstrate to the rest of the team how to use Kubernetes, and that becomes a story. But I'm only doing that because I need to deploy a product that I'm ready to deploy, but I can't because my team doesn't understand deployment technology. So I have to set up a story for them to spend some time to figure out, hey, how do I use this? What's the best way to use it? I could bake all that into a story and say, hey, listen, we're not going to have a separate story to learn things. Just go learn by doing it, and all of that will be assumed in the story. However, as you know, Scrum kind of assumes that there is some familiarity. If you're doing relative estimation, we're going to come back to one of the main arguing points here. I know that wasn't going to be the point of this podcast, but to address one of the main arguing points here, which is, well, if we're doing tasks that we've never done before, how can you say they're all the same size? We've never done them before. You don't have to handle those in the methodology. You can time box that effort to say, hey, take 2 days, 3 days, whatever it is, the whole sprint if you want. You're not on the team doing work that's counted against the team for the sprint. You're now on this task until you figure out how to do it, right?
Yeah.
And so basically you're either using a framework, Scrum or Kanban or whatever you want to do, or you're time boxing it. Well, Kanban kind of is time boxing a task, or you're time boxing the task and saying, hey, at the end of your time box, come out of your time box, come out of your hidey hole, and share with us what you've learned after that time. And if you've learned nothing, you're like, hey, I spent 2 days. I don't understand this. It's completely foreign to me. Well, maybe that's a trigger of a bigger problem, but number one. But number two, that's a way to leverage what you're doing now and deal with uncertainty. So keep predictability, because if they're wasting time on things that are too complicated to figure out, we're never going to do whatever.
Yeah.
Things that don't work out are good too. Hey, go spend some time learning this new technology. Hey, I learned this new technology. It's a flash in the pan, and I think this is total trash. We shouldn't use this. Well, you spent 2 days. At least we didn't spend $2 million.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I agree with spike stories or spike sprints even, right?
Yeah.
That's fine. I think that's a slightly different case to the credit card, because assuming the team knows how to, process credit cards.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, definitely agree with that. But I do like where you went with allocating that story to a different budget, the learning budget, right? And I don't know if everybody has that luxury, but that's really good, because it shows to the organization, people don't know this stuff, that you want them to do something. They're figuring it out as they go, right? And that's a good way, I think, to illustrate the need for learning and training.
Well, if you don't have a learning and development budget, I guarantee you there's another company out there that does have a learning.
I don't doubt it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what are you doing, and what is your company doing? First of all, what are you doing with your life where you're working for people that are like, we don't have time to get better. Get back to work.
Yeah. Yeah, those are people that
first of all
frown upon retrospectives. Don't waste your time.
That's right.
Go code some more.
And then second of all, if you do have that budget, you probably have a management that's saying, like, is this a budget that, like, we run out in December and try to hurry up and book people into trainings because we're going to lose the budget? That's not a good look either. Like, the better look is slowly over the year, you're training your people, or you're spending off time for your people to learn, for your people to evolve. So some of that stuff is done in community of practice type events, or like developer kind of hackathons, code dojos, or whatever you want to call it.
Right.
But listen, some of that work, it's in pursuit of product work. Why would you not bake it into your roadmap when I do things like this, my default time box, my feel-good default time box is 2 days. Because I feel if I spend 2 days, even if people are peer programming, 2 people, 2 days. So 4 days of productivity time, whatever, in sprint time, wasted, whatever, man. Like, at least I know I don't want to go down that
Well,
path.
then it's not a waste because you learned something.
I learned that I don't want to go down that path.
Yeah.
Time box things that are unknown, truly unknown. Work through the learnings together as a team and decide to pivot based on that kind of stuff. So you don't need to estimate stuff that's time boxed. It's just, it goes into your pool and you say, we're not going to spend more than X amount of time on this.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. One of the things that really makes me a little bit annoyed, let's say, is when teams have spike stories in their sprint that last the whole sprint. And they say, this is an 8-point story and we've estimated it. And at the end of the sprint, we haven't completed it. So this goes into the next sprint. Like, break it down some more. Do some vertical slice learnings, because not everything needs to go into a large story like that. You should be able to figure things out in a couple of days to see if you need more days.
Listen, that I've definitely had it happen to me before where people come, a couple days before the sprint ends and I'm still seeing the task in progress and I'm saying, hey, I thought we agreed to time box this. Like, what's going on? Like, I haven't seen a demo. I haven't really heard about any challenges in particular. Like, what's like, if you're walking the board, I feel these things will get vetted out to say, hey, this time box task, what's keeping it from moving forward to done?
Right.
Well, now I'm still working through it. It's kind of complicated. I'll get back to you tomorrow. Like, that's fine. I want to leave your room to experiment and to figure out your way. I want to let you grow and develop as a human being, psychologically, emotionally, physiologically, spiritually. But also, if I hear that as an update on the first day, it's like, oh, no, just leave me alone. I got this.
That's fine.
That's fine, but also, like, you don't have anything to show?
They got to have something.
You worked a whole day and you have nothing to show? That's a little far-fetched. I am a terrible programmer. I will freely admit, terrible programmer. Like, the way that I program, I don't know if you program this way. There's probably people going to listen to this and are going to laugh at me. 100% fine, because my things get done, but here's the way they get done. I write the script, and then I'll go back and I'll take sections of the script that are like copy-pasted or whatever, and I'll refactor those into functions. And then at the end, you have a nice normal program with functions. But when I write it originally, it's a giant, massive copy-pasted script that's just garbage. And I don't want to show it to anyone because it's embarrassing. Oh, I can't show it to you. It's really like no, I can show it to you. It's just ugly, unmaintainable. Like, I wouldn't want to pass it off to anyone else. But I do have something I can show you.
That's the point, right? You have something to show, right? It doesn't have to be the most elegant thing on the planet.
Right.
Maybe you decide on the second day, hey, none of this code gets called more than once and there are no functions needed. Fine, whatever. But show something toward the progress of it and say, here's what I've done. Here's where here's where I think I can get next. I don't know. I'll let you know tomorrow.
Right.
That's fine. But don't keep doing that every day of the sprint. And at the end of the day, last day of the sprint, say, I'm still not done.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
The other things that are steps in this journey, because that's kind of what we're outlining is like steps in a journey, is, now that I think about it, I do this on pretty much every team I have ever been on, is I start by writing the stories, because I'll have the template and I'll kind of, have the fields I need in Jira. I need business value. I need user persona. I need a couple fields that aren't in Jira by stock, so I'll create them and stuff like that. And I'll put refinements on the calendar and I'll start walking through the basic stuff when you're estimating, you know what I mean? But eventually I will start gently pushing back onto the team to say, okay, you guys have seen me writing stories for 6 months. You know that I say as a, and then I name a persona. I want some kind of piece of functionality, and that details why. You should ask me the why if you don't know the why, but I start gently pushing onto the developers. You guys have sat here and watched me write stories for 6 months. You should know how to write a story at this point. And if your writing stories is just completely copying the way that I write stories, and it's just really bad, listen, everybody writes first drafts. They're all terrible. So don't be embarrassed. Like, everybody learns to write stories by writing up a first draft of the story in front of everyone and getting yelled at. Everybody learns that way. So again, don't take it personal. But I feel if the product person, or I guess in larger organizations, maybe like a BA or something like that, if those people are writing the stories, interviewing the customer and writing the stories at the same time, talking with the subject matter expert, having them walk you through their workflow as you write the stories for them, Again, assuming you talk to customers.
Right.
I'd be even willing to be challenged on maybe you should have never been doing that in the first place, but I like to show what success looks like first and then start handing it off to the team to say, now it's your responsibility to do this, and like slowly cut over time, and then at some point the team will learn that skill and start doing it in the future. And then literally all the product manager has to do is show up with the correct people, the correct users to the session, the correct stakeholders to the session, and the correct why and vision in their mind, basically.
I think the developers co-creating stories is excellent. I encourage that by putting a template in place. When you click new to create a new story,
Yeah, you can do that.
it starts off with as a, and then there's a couple of braces there. They can fill in the persona or whatever. So one thing is, initially, yes, you're right. We need to show what good looks like. Don't go in there with the stories created. Do it in front of them.
Yeah.
And just work it out with them, interactively, so they can see the process is it's collaborative, right, in nature. And then flat out ask them, who would like to create the next story? Feel free to share your screen and let's do this. We'll do this together. So they don't feel like they're going to fail, right? You really can't fail. It's a learning exercise. But I agree. I think co-creating stories has a sense of co-ownership too, right? And if one person does it and goes through it as a developer, next one's going to put their hand up. That just happens organically. So I like that. I think that's the way to go. Not bring ready created stories and say, here you go, right? Go chew on these things. That's nuts.
I like where you started with that, which is one developer creates one story, and then when they create one story, like pass the baton to the next person and say, hey, like it'd be nice to have a team working agreement that says like whoever creates a story can't create the next story and they have to pass it to somebody else. So maybe it's like two people trading off back and forth.
Sure.
Maybe that's okay, but at a minimum, I don't want one person creating all the stories. I want a trade-off.
Well, I'll tell you what happened. A little slight anecdote here, a couple of seconds on that.
Yeah.
So one of the persons who basically put their hand up voluntarily, it was a QA person. And when she started writing the stories, it was really good because she started putting in the QA perspective. Like she would start asking questions like, well, that's good, but how can we test that, right? And to me, this is the essence of it, right? Collaborate together to see how the team jointly could meet the DoD on the story. So that was a great experience.
Something I brought up just now that we kind of glanced over is whoever the stakeholders are that the stories are kind of being written on behalf of, they should be in those refinements when you're writing the stories, and all of your developers on the development team should also be in those sessions, or at least whoever's going to work on it, right? If you have the ability to get down to that granular level before you even know you're going to be working on it. I don't even know how you do that, but if you can figure out how to do that, that's great. But the team should be talking directly with that customer.
That's heresy.
I know.
At most locations, they don't do that. I haven't seen the actual customer in there. I've seen the customer proxies. I've seen, BAs.
Like, whatever you got to do to get it, whatever you got to do to start. If it's a customer proxy, okay, fine, it's a customer proxy, but it's better than the product manager and the development lead or team lead or development manager going off and talking with the proxy by themselves and then bringing the work back to no, actually not even bringing the work back. This is like the Silicon Valley model or whatever, the people get lunch all day. Like the product manager and the development lead going and talking to the customer proxy and then talking to each other in a separate session, writing up the stories, and then the development lead without the product manager goes back to the developers and tells them what they need to program. That's the model that scares me more than anything else. Like a proxy with everybody in the room, I'm actually even more comfortable with than what I just described. What I just described is scary, and I've seen it in a bunch
multiple
of places.
multiple handoffs, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a prevalent model out there, unfortunately. That's what I've seen the most.
Yeah, well, that's very scary because the why doesn't ring true in that scenario. And a proxy's okay, but over time, whoever that proxy is, maybe your development team can get them comfortable bringing the customer in as well. Or if not, maybe you can get them comfortable asking the proxy to bring the customer to the sprint review, and then over time, as the customer and the proxy get comfortable with the development team at the sprint reviews, maybe they can kind of talk them into coming to the refinements.
I think that's a good model because it sets the expectation, right? What's coming next at the review. And then during the refinement, it sets the expectation of we're working on this, confirmation of the what and the why, so that at the next review, they're not surprised.
Oh, what a great and also sneaky way of evolving your team, of like just dovetailing your sprint review straight into a refinement because you have the people in the room. What a great sneaky way of advancing your team's understanding and you know.
Well, customers are hard to come by in terms of their time, so you may as well leverage it as much as you can.
It's not a bad plan as far as saving people time. It's not a bad plan. Like with sprint review is going to dovetail straight into a refinement. That's not bad actually. Now I think about it, like if I'm trying to think about techniques for teams who have a difficult time getting in front of their actual customers they're serving, that's not bad.
Then the customers also get to see if you're estimating your work. Let's say you haven't got to the point of no estimates.
Yeah.
The customers, if you're refining and estimating right away in that same session because the stories have just been refined, they're top of mind, then the customer gets an idea of the process, right? And they understand how much work the team can potentially take up. It might change a little, but so it's all about setting the right expectations from the beginning, right? So at the review, you can say we agreed on all these things, these 8 stories, we got 7 done, 1 we were waiting on something, we took it out of the sprint. That's fine, So I like that.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of people that might push back on what we're saying. I'm trying to think of what they might be concerned about. I could see teams with like proxy POs or weak POs or POs that are just kind of like pass-throughs for feature teams, stuff like that. They don't really know the why. They're just kind of doing what they're told. It's difficult to align your team and what they're doing to business priorities when your PO is kind of not really the empowered person in the business. So I guess maybe I should have started this podcast with this item. It's difficult to proceed in all the different ways that we've been talking about when your PO really doesn't know the why. They're not informed as to the company's vision. They're not informed as to the product vision. Maybe they're buried in a couple layers down in a group product management kind of layer. So there's some challenges there that maybe organizationally you have to talk with your PO and you have to talk with maybe a couple layers up in your organization to figure out if there's a better way you can solve, or maybe you have a PO who's overworked on many teams, and maybe that's another conversation.
Yeah, and I've also seen that kind of behavior from teams that say, but we're developing things in a B2B environment and then they have the customers. So how can we get access to those customers, right? And that's also not true because you need to really live in the shoes of the actual customers.
Right.
But yeah, I think any of these things, if you can start with them and then evolve to the place where your teams are getting more mature, it might take a few sprints, you'll probably get there where they don't have to estimate eventually, right? But give them the rationale, give them the tools they need to succeed with it, and then put these techniques in place.
I just wish I had a better suggestion about aligning your PO properly. If they're not, I don't have much of a suggestion there because
I have one.
Oh, okay.
My suggestion is, this is going to sound a little radical. How about your PO coming from the customer's organization, right? From them, like one of the customers is your PO. Now your SME is in the room with you, right? Think about it.
Yeah. Maybe if you show business value in line with the rest of your metrics, or maybe if you have customer actual usage metrics to show before and after features, maybe you can help your PO be a bit more empowered or a bit more data driven with their decisions. Maybe you can help them with their decisions. I don't know. I'm trying to think of trying to help a struggling PO in an organization where they're basically just told, like, just deliver these features and get out of here, kid.
It's a feature factory.
Yeah. That's the only thing I can think of. So the other thing that I tell my teams is I don't really care how they estimate, like story points, hours, whatever, because I'm going to be watching the throughput for their stories. I'm going to be watching I'm going to watch the throughput, and I'm going to watch the cycle time and lead time. So how many stories did they complete in the sprint? Basically just pure number of stories, and what the cycle time and lead time for the stories that the team pulls through are. I'm going to watch all 3 of those. I'm a little less concerned about lead time.
Yeah.
Because you can game that, and it depends on the organization's intake method and stuff like that. I'm a little less concerned about it for the team. I am more concerned for the program, right?
Yes.
But I'm going to be watching cycle time. I'm going to be watching throughput, and with an eye on the the burn down / velocity that the team is putting through. Because I'm going to be I as the product person am going to be looking if they were kind of equal. Like if my velocity is relatively stable, I would also expect that my cycle time is relatively stable.
Oh, absolutely. They're correlated, right? So I think the thing to do is to make sure you know what metric you're using and what time horizon it spans over, right? So obviously velocity per sprint, etc. Cycle time, you want to give a good time range, maybe 2-3 months, so it can average out. So I think that's good, because cycle time does give you on average how long things are in the hopper from start to finish. I'm not concerned about lead time, because it's one of those metrics that if the team is doing a good job, it perhaps tends to punish them. And here's how, right? You do a good job and get all these stories in your backlog, right? So you have a reasonably good backlog, not too deep to the point where it's so deep that it's just going to decay away. So if you're doing that and the team is taking off the top of the stack a certain number of stories and kind of churning away through the backlog, those stories that you put on the backlog to begin with, their lead time started the minute they were created.
Right. Yeah.
So that lead time is going to be excessively long when they deliver, but actually they may deliver their story appropriately, meaning when it was supposed to be delivered, right? Which sprint, etc. if you're sprinting. So that's one. The other side of it is if you're using Kanban, you don't have a very deep backlog typically, then your lead time looks great, right? And so what about cycle time? Well, what time bands are you using for that? This is Kanban. So again, put up a time band. Just say it's a month or 3 months, whatever time period you use it consistently. Obviously, don't switch. But so I think those have to be taken in context, right?
If you're using Jira, for example, like I haven't done that in a while on a podcast. Like if you're using Jira and you enjoy pain, so that you use Jira, and you don't need to ever show things like across multiple teams or products or at a leadership level, I guess, then I guess you use Jira.
There you go.
There. So like if you're using Jira gives you a control chart. They call it control chart because they like the word control.
Of course they do.
Because it's hilarious.
Yeah, well, you're working in a project, aren't you?
Yeah. That's why all their products are called projects. But what the control chart in Jira does is it lets you see the time at every step in whatever workflow you've created in your overly complex workflow and or steps. But it lets you inspect every step. So how long does it take to go from step to step in every step? So if you truly are dedicated to continuous improvement, I mean, you really could sit down and look at the average of how long it takes items to go from step to step and have a deep conversation, a data-driven conversation, like emotions out of it, data-driven conversation of let's look at all the work items that took longer than the average in the last 3 cycles, whatever, I don't know, time period, and figure out why they took that long, to see if there's some kind of commonality, to see if there's maybe a whole bunch of flukes happened. Maybe something happened completely outside of your control. Maybe there's nothing you could have done, and you just look at them all and say, nothing we could have done, and you moved it up. At least you've done something towards continuous improvement. You've inspected and decided that there's really nothing that could have been done. This is just terrible coincidence. Let's cross our fingers and hope it doesn't happen again. But more than likely, you will look at that list of things and say, well, in this one, we had to wait on whatever. We probably should have never picked it up in the first place. This one, we had this blow up in production and we just forgot to take it, whatever. Maybe we need to be more diligent. This one, we had a problem. We didn't expect it to be. So to truly talk to the reasons with the data on the table, not blame anyone, you know what I mean? Talk to the work, not through the people,
right? And
have a conversation in each. So pick a step. What's your worst step? How can we improve that worst step? And if you're having a throughput discussion, right? It could be the whole cycle. It could be one particular step in a cycle, whatever. Doesn't matter for this conversation. You can have a real deep, continuous improvement conversation if you've got those metrics in front of you.
Yeah, those are great points. So the discussion you're having at that point in the continuous improvement realm, to your point, right? They are evidence-based.
Right.
So that's the first thing, right? And they are historical, but you can look at those as a team and say, here's where we need to focus. So select where your focus is. You can't focus on everything. And then improve on that. You can, but you won't get anywhere. Yeah, so that's it. The other thing I want to just quickly mention is you can do this even if you're using Scrum. It's not just Kanban, right? And most ALM tools.
That chart works in Jira. that chart works regardless.
Yeah. And in most ALM tools, right, you can derive that chart. It's often called a cumulative flow diagram, where it lets you identify where the bottlenecks are. These are great tools for you to look at as a team on a regular basis. Typically, the best place to do that might be a retrospective, or you don't have to wait for a retrospective if you're experiencing a bottleneck. Anytime is fine to have that discussion as a team. Have it as a team, no blaming, right? Tackle the problem, not the person or not the people. I think you're golden if you can do that.
Let's move to summarize kind of what we learned in this podcast. I think the number one takeaway here, that you should build data if you don't have data. Like you definitely shouldn't. You should be quantitative, not qualitative, in looking at decisions of what to improve and what not to improve. For certain, you should involve the whole team every time that you can, and you should try to get the whole team learning new skills of the, like, for example, the one-to-one-to-one type of thing we talked about before, and deal with new work and unknown work and stuff like that in its own little time box, its own little area, so it doesn't blow up and impact and take over your whole thing. Maybe a fair point that we didn't talk about would be, well, what if I deal with a lot of unknown support work? Which I kind of also would ascribe to, like, well, you can have a Kanban lane for putting out fires. And
what we usually set up is an expedite lane or a fire lane. So I mean, just because you have unknowns doesn't mean you can't use these techniques, right? Absolutely.
If you do these steps, eventually you get to a point where the work items end up being the same size, and at the point where you have a team agreement where the work items will be the same size, we're not going to estimate things if we truly believe that we don't know, we're unsure. You know what I mean? You're going to get to a point where basically if you all agree 1, 2, and 3s are 3s, or whatever, whatever you pick, or you all agree that, like, hey, if it's over 8, there's too much unknown, we don't want to deal with it, we need to break it down. You'll eventually get to a point where your refinement process kind of weeds all this stuff out, and there's just no point anymore in talking about estimation, and you'll be living in the future.
You will be. You'll be in the flow rate world. You'll be talking about number of stories per item, number of days, 4 days, 5 days, whatever days. Yeah, so hopefully this was useful. Certainly let us know other topics that you would like us to tackle. Go to arguingagile.com, and just like Clint did, I think that's probably it.
There you go, Clint. Hopefully we answered your question.
Like and subscribe, folks.
Like and subscribe if we answer your question. And if we didn't answer your question,
like and subscribe
anyway.